Hello everyone and welcome to today's Sage Business Cloud webinar explaining how to set up Sage Payroll. So let's now take a look at what we're going to cover in the webinar today. So we'll begin with an introduction to the key features of Sage Business Cloud Payroll. We're going to explain how to access the software, and it's all done from within your web browser. We'll give you a quick tour of the Sage Payroll software, and we'll run through a checklist of the information that you'll need to get started. We're then going to demonstrate the setup options. So we'll start with the simplest option, how to set up a new payroll if you're taking on employees for the first time. We'll then move on to how to move your payroll to Sage Payroll either manually or by importing your employees from your latest FPS file. We'll talk you through the auto enrollment and pension setup in the software, and also some additional setup steps to get you ready for that first pay run. And then we should have a couple of minutes at the end of the session to answer any of your final questions. So please keep them coming as you think of them in the Q&A section. A quick note for anyone that is already set up, we do have another webinar that takes you through processing your first pay run in Sage Payroll. So you'll see the full end-to-end process, and you can sign up for that webinar either live or on demand from our website. So follow the link in the slides that you can download if you want to sign up for our Process Your Payroll webinar. So let's get on with our introduction. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to quickly mention some of the key features of Sage Business Cloud Payroll. So as the name suggests, it is completely cloud-based. So you'll access your payroll through your web browser, which means there is nothing that you will need to install at payroll year end or at any other time. So you get the convenience of accessing your payroll from any device with an internet connection. So it could be your PC or laptop, could be a tablet or even a mobile phone. You've got access to our online payslips features, so you can host your employees' payslips and P60s in an online portal, and they can then access those documents either through a web browser or through a mobile app. Got auto enrollment and pension features, which will ensure that you stay compliant and anyone that meets the criteria to be auto enrolled is put into your pension. And you can also send pension data for supported providers directly to them. There's integration with Sage Accounting. So if you use Business Cloud for your accounting, you can transfer your payroll information seamlessly into your accounts. Got the option of setting up additional users if it's more than just you that needs to run the payroll. And we do have 24/7 help and support available. I'll be running through some of the help options at the end of the webinar. You also get a lot of flexibility with your subscription. So if at any point you need to amend the number of employees in your license, it's as simple as going to Manage Business Account within Sage Business Cloud Payroll, and then Subscription and Invoices, and then you can change your subscription to suit your business needs. So if the business is growing, you're taking on more employees, you can increase the number of employees in your payroll, or if your employees have decreased, you can reduce them. And you can find that from the link on the current slide. So before we go into a quick tour of Sage Payroll, I'll just explain how you access it. So like I mentioned, it's all done from your web browser. So head along to www.sage.com and you'll find the login option just towards the top right-hand side of the screen. And then under My Products, you'll need to choose Sage Business Cloud, Accounting and Payroll. And then you'll be prompted at that point to sign in with your email address and password. And once you've signed in, that'll take you to a page that looks something like this. So this is your payroll summary once you've completed the setup. So what I'm showing you now is where we want to get you to come the end of this webinar. So within the payroll summary, it's going to show you your next pay runs for any pay frequencies that you might have. So 8th of July for my weekly pay run, 25th of July for my monthlies. Got information about any upcoming RTI submissions. So we've got an EPS due at the end of the June tax month. And then we've got a panel to do with your pension submissions, reminding you if you've got any outstanding submissions to make to the pension provider. You've then got other areas organised into tabs at the top of the screen. So pay runs is where you will come to actually process your payroll. So we can process our next weekly pay run or monthly pay run. And you'll also see a list of the payroll history just here on the right hand side, where you can go back to review that historical period and, if required, make any corrections. The next tab is where you manage your employee records. So you will set up new employees that you take on from here. And you can also view and edit the information for any existing employees. You've got the pensions tab, where you will set up and maintain your pension scheme or schemes if you have more than one. A couple of pension reports that you might find useful. Just down here, you'll be able to review your pension settings if you need to by clicking Edit Pension. And then the next tab is to deal with all of your payroll year-end tasks. So this won't come up until the 5th of April 2023, and there'll be the tasks that you'll need to complete once you've finished your pay runs for the current tax year. Next up, you have a list of reports that you can run. So you can report on net pay, payslip summaries, employer costs, liability totals, average earnings and working hours, and absences. And then finally, we have a settings area. A lot of these settings we'll go into today, but this is where you'll come to check your payroll settings, for example, your pay calendars, payments and deductions, etc. So that's how the payroll looks once it's all set up. I will point out that throughout the payroll, you will see these help icons, and these will take you directly to the relevant help page for the area that you're looking at. So this one, for example, takes us to the payroll summary, but anytime you can click on the help option in the bar at the top, and that will take you to our help homepage. From here, you can search for the topic that you're interested in, or you can use these menu options on the left-hand side to locate the help article that you're looking for. So loads of useful information available in the Help Centre, but if you do need to get in touch with our support team, just scroll down to the bottom of any of our help articles where you'll find a Get in Touch link. And then from here, just choose that you're a customer needing help with Business Cloud Payroll, and you get the various contact options that you will need for our support team. So very quick product tour for you. As I say, this one is already set up, so this is the point that we're aiming to get you to. So we're now going to take a look at a list of the information that you're going to need in order to set up your payroll. So this is the list. You can download the slides if you'd like a copy of this checklist as well. So we've split it into 3 sections: employer details, employee details, and pension details. So in terms of your employer information, you're going to need your PAYE reference and accounts office reference, and a user ID and password for PAYE online services. You'll also need to know how often you make payments to HMRC, that's your reporting frequency, and the payment method. So that information is required whether you're a new company or an existing payroll at the start of the tax year or even mid-tax year. Now, if you're setting up after the start of the tax year, there's a bit more information you'll need. So we recommend that you do this at the end of a P32 reporting period, so that you can report on the full reporting period in either your old or your new software. So you'll need to know which tax period you last did a P32 for, and also employment allowance claimed in the tax year. In terms of your employee details, you would need their personal details, such as name, address, date of birth, gender, and national insurance number. If it's a brand new employee that you're taking on for the first time, you'll need their P45 or starter checklist, also known as P46. Or if it's an existing employee, you'll need to know their pay, tax, and national insurance details for the current tax year, which you can get from your P11 reports. Also, for existing employees, they should have an RTI Pay ID in your old software. So best advice is to carry that forward and use it in Sage Payroll as well. And finally, you'll need some pension details. So provider information, including any references, groups, or payment sources you may have set up on the provider's portal. The employee and employer contribution details, how the pension contributions are calculated, whether that's based on qualifying earnings or pensionable pay, and the tax relief setting. So is it deducted before or after tax? And if you're an existing business, you'll also need to know your staging or duties start date. So that was the date from which the auto enrolment rules came into force for your business. So we'll refer back to this information throughout the webinar, but what we're going to do now is we're going to move on and take a look at what's involved in setting up your payroll. So I've tried to break this down into 4 tasks. So the first one is to enter your employer details, such as that PAYE reference and accounts office reference. You'll then need to set up a payday calendar where you're going to define the pay frequency and the usual pay days. You'll then enter or import employee details, depending on how you choose to complete the setup. And then you'll need to set up your pension schemes and, if required, add any pension history. So those steps will apply whether you're a brand new business or if you're moving an existing payroll to Sage. But if you are moving an existing payroll and you're doing this after the start of the tax year, you're also going to need some opening balances from your previous software. So for the employer, that would be any statutory payments that you've reclaimed or employment allowance that you've claimed from HMRC. And you'll get that from your P32 report. And for the employees, it's their year-to-date information. So the pay, tax, and national insurance details, which you typically get from a P11 report. So what we're going to do in the demos today is we're going to run you through the 3 setup options in the software. When it comes to employer details, as you'll see in the demo, you are prompted to enter them when you first set up your payroll. But if you've already done that step, you can check them from the settings option. If you go into payroll settings, and that is where you're going to find the PAYE reference and accounts office reference, as well as confirming your reporting frequency and payment method to HMRC. That's then going to take us into a welcome wizard, and that's when you'll choose how you want to set up your software. So it's going to give you 3 options in the welcome wizard. The first 2 are the ones that you would use if you're moving a payroll to Sage, and you've got existing employees and year-to-date information. So you can either do this manually, where you would enter the employee details and the year-to-date values yourself, or you can import your employee information from an FPS file from your previous software. The third option is used if you're a brand new business taking on your first employees, and can also be used if you're migrating an existing payroll at the start of the tax year. So we are now past the start of the tax year, so I'm assuming if you are moving a payroll, you are going to be doing this mid-tax year. So this is when you are going to need your opening balances. So we'll start with the simplest option in how to set up a new company, and this will give us a chance to take a closer look at the pay calendar and the information that you'll need to set up an employee record. So I'm just going to jump into a demo. Let's just move this one down and bring a different browser window up. So this is the screens that you will see when you add payroll to your subscription for the first time. And as you can see, I'm being prompted for my PAYE reference and accounts office reference, and then my reporting frequency and payment method in terms of paying HMRC. So when you enter that initial information, it then takes you into the payroll software. You will land on the summary tab, but it won't be the payroll summary that you saw in the tour earlier. It's the setup options where we can choose one of the 3. So for this first demo, I'm going to create a new payroll company. Let's imagine I've taken on my very first employee. I'm going to click onto new company, and then you'll see there are just 2 simple steps we need to complete. So that is to set up our employee paydays and then to add the employees to payroll. So you can click on the links in each of the steps to complete these tasks. Starting with the pay days, you'll first need to choose your pay frequency, whether that's weekly, monthly, 2 weekly, or 4 weekly. And in this example, I'm going to set up a monthly calendar where I will need to choose the day of the month that the employees usually get paid. So that can either be same day of month or last day of month. I'm going to go with same day. We can then choose the date of the month, which will be the 25th in this example. And we can also select the first pay run that we'll be completing in Sage. So our first pay date for this new employee is going to be the 25th of May. There is an option to avoid public holidays and weekends, which will automatically adjust the pay day if the 25th happened to land on a non-banking day. But I've cleared that box because I want to record the 25th as the pay date every month. So when I click on to save, that has set up a monthly calendar. You can do something similar if you have other pay frequencies. So for weekly, you choose a day of the week as your usual pay date, and you would set your first pay date in Sage Payroll. And again, you can avoid public holidays and weekends. Once you've set these calendars up, you can click View Pay Calendar, and that actually shows you all of the upcoming pay dates for the current tax year. So having completed that first step, I can go back to the summary and back into the new company option, and you can see that we have already set up our pay days. What we then need to do is to add the employees to payroll. Now remember, these are new employees I'm talking about for this first demo. So it takes us to the Employees tab. When we click on that step, we can click on to Create Employee here at the top, and then it's a case of entering that employee's details. So anything with a star next to it is required. So we need to put in the employee's full name, and always use the full name as it appears on things like their passport or other identity document. We've got the date of birth here and gender. You would fill in the address lines, and a top tip here is to use both of the first 2 address lines. So you might put the house number on street 1 and the actual street name on street 2, as that is required for certain pension providers when you're submitting information. And then we would go through at the pay cycle, contracted hours. We can enter a works number if we want to, employee start date, and pay method. And then if required, if they're a director of the company, we can select the director details, and we can choose a director national insurance calculation method. The paid document preferences is in relation to payslips that you might print or email. The other option for payslips is hosting them online. But if you were going to email them, you can set an email address and a password that will need to be entered to access the payslip itself. And then if they've started after the start of the tax year, they'll have a P45 or they'll have filled in a P46. So you would choose the relevant option for your new employee. Choose the circumstances on the starter checklist in this case, national insurance category, and whether they are repaying a student or postgraduate loan. So I've got some details entered. I would save that employee record, and that has set them up. And if I return back to the summary, this now looks more like the summary that we saw earlier. And we're at the point now where we can set up our pensions, claim our employment allowance if required, and then get ready for that first pay run. So I wanted to start with that option because it is the simplest. Let's just give you a quick recap of the steps that we just saw. So we chose the option to create a new payroll company, which you would use if taking on your first employee or migrating a payroll at the start of the tax year. You saw that we entered the employee details manually, and there are no opening balances required. And the 2 steps there were to set up the pay calendar, payday calendar, choosing the pay frequency and the usual pay date. And then we created our employee records by entering the relevant information. So that's all well and good if you are a brand new business taking on your first employee. But now let's take a look at what's involved in actually moving an existing payroll over to Sage. So this is where the other two options come into play. You can either manually migrate, which is more suited to smaller payrolls where you're happy to enter all of the employee details and opening balances manually. Or there's another option, which I'll show you in a few minutes, where you can import existing employees from a FPS file. So we'll take a look at manually migrate first. I'm just going to jump back to the demo. And what I'm going to do here is I'm just going to reset my payroll data. So I'm just going to go into the settings and then data management. And then you'll see there's an option to reset data, which kind of removes everything I've done. I just need to confirm my email address and click reset data. And then we're back to that initial startup wizard where we can enter our PAYE reference and our accounts office reference. So that gets me back to the point we were before, where we can see the three setup options. So this time I'm going to choose manually migrate, and I'm just going to show you where you would enter the information. We'll just do this for one employee. So I'd click on manually migrate. You can see it takes you into a three-step wizard. It's important that you complete this wizard, even if you're going to come back and add further employees later, because if you click away from this screen at any point, you will lose any of the information that you've entered. So first of all, we need to confirm the last completed P32 reporting period in our old software. So we do recommend that you move over at the start of a tax month. So in this example, I'm going to be starting to use Sage in June. So the last P32 reporting period I completed in my old software is month 2, it's May. And then I'll set up my calendar, and again, I'm going for a monthly calendar. I'm going to use the same settings, paid on the 25th of the month, without avoiding public holidays and weekends. So that sets up the pay calendar. And then you get to a screen where you can add your employee details. And when you do this, you'll also need to add their opening balances. So we'll go into the screen. I'll just set up the first employee for you. So I've put the employee name in at the top, and we can add their personal details. So again, anything with the star is the mandatory field. And you'll see, as before, I'm filling in the first 2 address lines. You've then got the tax details tab. So I'm going to set the pay cycle, contracted hours, the start date. So when we originally took this employee on, actually back in 2020, payment method, the tax code for this employee, and their NI category, and then also a mandatory field, the RTI Pay ID. It's a unique identifier for that employee that was used in your RTI submissions. So again, you need to check your previous software to find out what that was. You then move on to the opening balances tab. You would indicate if the employee has been paid in this tax year, which they most often will have. And then you'd need to fill in the PAYE details. So the gross and taxable pay in this employment, plus any tax paid, as well as the NIC details, which would include the earnings at the different earnings bands. So the easiest place to find this information is from P11 reports, which you can get in the Sage Desktop payroll software. And you should find equivalent reports in any payroll software that has this information. And then you would work through, and if required, add directorship details. It's a company director, statutory payments, if they've received them during the tax year, student loan repayments, and if they joined you in this tax year and they had P45 figures, you would enter these in this bottom section. So I'm not actually going to fill the values in. but I do have some slides that show you where you'd get that information from. I'm just going to go ahead and save that first employee. You can see it's added the employee record. And if I wanted to save that employee at this point and maybe come back and add some more employees later, remember I need to complete this wizard. I need to click next, and I need to click submit. And that takes us to a bit of a checklist of the next steps. I'm going to mention these steps when we talk about importing. So it's entering employer payment values and employment allowance values, confirming employee details, entering current absences, and setting up student loans. So you can see that has completed the initial setup. So we've now got a payroll summary. But if you wanted to come back to add further employees before you do your first pay run, from the summary, just click on this link to review, edit, or further configure your migrated data. And then you can click on this top link, review or edit your migrated data, which will take you back to this initial wizard. And this is where we can start adding our other employees. And again, make sure you go to step 3 and click submit to save the details of anyone you enter. So we are going to take a look at auto enrolment and pensions a little bit later on in the webinar, but we're going to stop there for the manually migrate option, and we'll just give you another quick recap. So this was the option we chose because we wanted to enter employee details and opening balances manually. Here's just an example of where you might find the opening balances on P11 reports. So it's the report totals you'll be looking for on the P11 reports for both PAYE and National Insurance, and they will go into the PAYE details and NIC details section. If you've got statutory payments, that's also on the P11 NIC details, and student loan deductions would be found on that report as well. When it comes to the employer payment values, you'll be able to enter any statutory pay you've recovered for the tax year to date. You'd find that on your P32. And there's a section to enter employment allowance claimed in the tax year. And again, I'll show you that area when we do the next demo. So manually migrate is great for a small payroll if you're happy to spend the time entering the information manually. But there's an easier way if you have an existing payroll and you can get an FPS file from that payroll to import the employee details, which will save you time, should reduce errors, and just streamline the startup process somewhat. So that's where the import employees option comes in. It's an FPS file that you'll need from your previous software, and that automatically creates the employee records and enters opening balances. Although a quick caveat, you will need to enter some of the employee details manually, but it does create the records and sets most of it up for you. So let's take a look at that process next. So like I did before, I'm just going to go into the settings and reset my data. So I can get back to that initial wizard again. So popping in my PAYE reference, accounts office reference, report and frequency, and pay method. And that takes us back to the Welcome to Payroll wizard. So this time, I'm going to choose Import Employees. It then tells us how we're going to import. So we're going to upload our most recent FPS file. We're then going to review the information imported and set everything up before doing our pay run. And then if you scroll down from this section, there is some advice on where to find your FPS file. So if you're using Sage 50 Cloud Payroll and you're moving over to Business Cloud Payroll, shows you can find this from the e-submissions tasks in the FPS viewer. Similar steps for instant payroll and other payroll providers may also be able to give you an FPS file. So we'll go on to the next step where we can upload our FPS. So I've already exported this from my old software. I saved it on my desktop and I called it FPS. It validates the file by checking that the employer details match what you've entered in Sage Business Cloud Payroll, and it will then ask you what information you want to import from this file. Now, if you're setting up mid-tax year, you'll want to choose the first option to import personal and financial data. So that'll bring in the employee's name, national insurance number, the opening balances, so the pay values, national insurance and PAYE. But the other option, personal data only, is only recommended if you're setting up your payroll at the beginning of a new tax year using your FPS file from a previous tax year. So you wouldn't need opening balances in that scenario, but because we're going to start using Sage in June, we will need our personal and financial data. So I'm going to click on to next, and what it then does is it gives you a preview of the employees that it's about to import. So we've got them all selected by default. We're going to bring in these 5 employees. I'm then going to click confirm and complete import. And that will set up the 5 employee records. And it'll give us a handy checklist to work through to complete the setup of my program. Now, you may need to repeat the import process if you have multiple FPS files you need to bring in. So a good example of that is you might run a monthly and a weekly payroll, and you submit your monthly and weekly payroll at separate times. So you'll be able to get an FPS file for each of those pay frequencies and import them. And to get back to the import wizard, you can always go to settings here at the top, and you've got the option at the bottom here to import FPS file. Now I'm going to go to the summary to continue the setup. Setting up your pay days works in exactly the same way as the first method I showed you. So I'm just going to set up a monthly calendar, just like I did before. And I'm going to set the first pay run to the 25th of June. Once you complete the step, you go back to the summary. Then you can pick up the checklist where you left off. So I'm going to tick the box to say that I've set up the pay days. Next up, you'll need to review the employee information that you've imported. So entering previous employment values where applicable. So that's P45 figures for employees that you took on after the start of the tax year. Checking the opening balances and confirming working patterns. And when you come to complete this task, you will see there's other information that you need to enter. And we've actually got a warning here in the RTI section that 5 employees require attention. So if I click on update their employee records, it takes us to that list of 5 employees. You can see that issues do require attention. So I'm just going to run through these steps for just one of my employees. So if I click on employee 1, you can see at the top the warning says that the employee's start date is required. So it's a case of editing the employee, adding the original start date for them. And while I'm here, I could add in the missing address lines, which haven't come through in the file that I imported. So as you can see, that has resolved the RTI issue. And what you can then do for that particular employee is you can check their working pattern. So if they don't work a standard Monday to Friday, you can edit that working pattern, set up a custom working pattern for them. You can set pay document preferences. You can check their opening balances. So you can see here, the information has been imported, including pensions, student loan contributions. And then workplace pensions is something that we will come back to. So you'd work through each of these employees, resolving the issues that require attention. And then once you're back to the summary, you can tick the box to confirm that you've completed that step. So next 2 steps are around entering the employer values, so statutory pay recovery and compensation and employment allowance values. And again, clicking on the link will take you to the relevant area in the program. So for this one, I am eligible for small employers relief. And if you take a look at my P32 report, so I ran this from my old software, you can see that I have recovered some SPP, so 31332. And I also have some NI compensation, which was £9.40. And I can then save those values so that I've got a record of the statutory pay I have previously reclaimed. You do something similar for employment allowance. So I've applied for the allowance. I did it at the start of the tax year, and then allowance used 1899 in this example. So we can continue claiming that in Business Cloud Payroll, and it will stop once the £5,000 has been recovered. So I can tick off those two steps. We can set up student loan deductions for anyone who is currently repaying a student loan. So it takes you to your payment and deduction settings. When you click on create new deduction, you can create them for the various types of student loan. So I've got an employee who's repaying a student loan. If I set this up, this deduction, I can add it to his pay slip when I do my first pay run. And then the final two steps are around setting up employer pensions, and I'm going to cover those in the next part of the webinar. So another quick recap of importing employees. You'd use an FPS file from your previous software. It automatically creates the employee records and brings in the opening balances. Once you've done the import, you would then work through the checklist to set up your pay calendar, to check the employee details, enter any missing information, check working patterns, etc. You would then migrate the employer values, so statutory payments recovered and employment allowance, and finally you would set up and assign the pension. So speaking of pensions, that's what we're going to cover next, auto enrolment and pensions. The features in Sage Business Cloud Payroll will automatically enroll anyone that meets the criteria to be in a pension scheme, and it will ensure that you are deducting at least the minimum amounts. And for supported pension providers, it will also help you to submit the information to them. For example, with Nest or Smart Pensions, you can do a direct link and submit your payroll information. But you will need to set this up as part of your setup process. So let's take a look at the steps for an existing payroll. So 3 steps you'll need to complete. Number 1 is to confirm your staging or duty start date. Step 2 is to add the pension scheme details. And then step 3 will be to assign existing employees to that pension scheme. So let's take a look at how to do that. So we can get to the employer pensions area from our checklist if we've imported our employees, or alternatively, you can go to the pensions tab at the top of the screen and you can complete this first step, which is to confirm your staging or duties start date. Now, it'll depend when you first became an employer what this date will be. If you're an employer before 2018, you will have been given a staging date by the pensions regulator, and that was the date that your duties came into effect. Or since 2018, your duty start date will have been the date that you took on your first employee. Actually, there's a bit of help here that explains what that is, and a link to the pensions regulator if you need any more information. So in this example, we've put in our staging or duty start date as the 1st of January 2020, as that was the date that we took on our first employee. You then select your enrolment status, and because we're moving an existing payroll, auto enrolment for this company is set up. We've been doing it, we just did it in previous software. And all we then need to do is click Save, and it tells us that the pension is ready to be set up. So you can see we've got a pop-up for some of the help options if you want some further help on setting up pensions. So do check this out, which you can also get here from the help message. I do have an existing pension scheme, so I'm going to set that question to yes. And what I can then do is click onto add a new pension, and we can then enter our pension settings. So if you're with any of these four providers, so Nest, Now Pensions, People's Pension, or Smart Pension, you would just choose the relevant link. Or if you're with any other pension provider, you would choose the link to add your own custom pension. So in this example, we're going to choose Nest. And all we need to do here is to enter our Nest employer reference and then set up at least one group and one payment source. So the group contains all of the settings for calculating the pension contribution, and you'll need to make sure that these settings exactly match the group that you set up on your pension provider's portal. So when I click onto add group, it takes me through a two-step wizard where I can enter the group name, and it's important that it exactly matches the group name you gave it on the Nest portal. You choose the tax relief setting, so whether contributions are deducted before or after tax. And for my Nest scheme, the contribution is taken after tax. And then you can set the type of deduction, which in most cases is percentage. And I'm going to set my employer contribution to 3% and my employee contribution to 5%. You then move on to the next step, and this is where you confirm the earnings basis for the employee contributions. So the three options here are pensionable pay, where contributions are worked out on specific types of pay, for example, salary, but not overtime and bonuses. There's the qualifying earnings setting, which is quite common for auto-enrollment schemes, where all earnings between the lower and upper limit of qualifying earnings are used to calculate contributions. And you can also set custom earnings basis with your own upper and lower limits. So in this example, my pension scheme uses qualifying earnings between the lower and upper thresholds. And all I then need to do is to confirm the date that I make payments to Nest. And I'm going to set this one as my default plan. So that's entered the group settings. For Nest, you also need to add a payment source. So just enter the source name, exactly matching what you set up on the provider's portal. It's a qualifying scheme for auto-enrollment, and I would then tick the box to accept the terms. So that has set up my pension scheme. I can tick the box confirming that it qualifies, and if I go back to the pensions area, that's the pension scheme that I've set up, and if required, I can add any other pension schemes that our company is using. So going back to the summary tab, we can tick off the step that we've set up our employer pensions. And then our final step is to assign employees to the pension plan. So you do this from the employees area. Again, I'm just going to do it for one of my employees. So let's choose employee 1. We go onto the workplace pensions tab. And then when you click edit, what you do here is you set the status that applies to this employee. So you can see a number of different statuses, and you can read the status definitions just underneath. The most common ones would be they've been enrolled into a scheme, they'd previously joined a qualifying scheme, or perhaps they've opted out or ceased membership. So in this case, the employee was previously enrolled, their enrollment date 1st of January 2020, and then we can make sure we've selected the relevant scheme for that particular employee. So that then gives the history of the pension status. If they had previously opted out, for example, the system would know not to put them back into the pension until you're doing your re-enrollment activity, which is every 3 years. So again, you'd work through each of the employees. So I've still got start dates and address lines to enter. but you can set the status if required for each of those employees. Just put some details in which should allow us to save it. So once you've done that, you can tick off your final step, and that is the setup almost complete. So quick recap of those steps before we look at some additional setup. So you've just seen the 3 steps for an existing payroll. Slightly different if you're a new company taking on employees for the first time. So you would set your duty start date, and that would be the date you took on your first employee. You'd then work through a checklist. So you tick some boxes to help you understand your auto enrolment duties. One of those steps involves setting up the new pension scheme, and you'll also be able to produce letters introducing your employees to auto enrolment, giving them a little bit of information on that. So last thing I'm going to cover just for the last 5 minutes or so is additional setup. We're going to start with employment allowance. So this is a government scheme which allows eligible employers to claim up to £5,000 each tax year by reducing the employer national insurance contributions when recording payments to HMRC. If you're eligible for employment allowance, you do need to submit a claim for each tax year. And if you're switching software, if you're moving to Sage Business Cloud from other payroll software, you'll need to record that claim in your new software so that it can continue to claim the allowance. So we'll take a look at where you do this. So I'm on my payroll summary, and you'll see in the RTI section, there is an option to record your employment allowance claim. Just click on the button, choose the industry sector that applies to you. So industrial if it's not agriculture, fisheries or road transport. And then you can fill in your government gateway user ID and password. You can store these credentials for future submissions if you wish to. And when you click on to submit, that will submit your claim. And it doesn't matter if it's already been submitted from your previous software. This just allows Sage Payroll to continue with that claim. And you can see that that was successfully sent. And now at the end of each tax period that I complete, the program will be able to claim the remaining employment allowance. And you'll remember, if I go back to my settings, migrate employment allowance values, I've already claimed this amount. So I've got about another £3,101 that I can claim in the future. So that's the employment allowance. And that's the P32 report that you run at the end of each tax period. And that will keep a running total of how much you've reclaimed. Next thing to mention is user management. So if you've got other payroll users that need to be able to log in and run the payroll, you can add them as a full payroll user. So this is done from the user management section within your settings. And then there is some additional setup that you could complete before your first pay run, including choosing a payslip template if you're going to be printing or emailing them, or setting up online payslips if you prefer to do that instead. And also, similar to what we did with the student loan, you can set up your payments and deductions in advance so that they're ready and available to select on your employees' payslips when you process that first pay run. And you can find all of those options, including the manage users option from the settings option. So user management was in personalization. Online payslip settings you'll find within your payroll settings and the payslip template. And then payments and deductions can be set up from here. So that's about it for the presentation. So we're going to give you the chance to submit any further questions that you might have while I quickly run through some of the further support that's available. So following on from this webinar, you may want to attend our Process Your Payroll webinar, which is available on demand or live. That takes you through setting up payments and deductions, processing the end-to-end pay run, So 4 simple steps in Sage Business Cloud Payroll. It talks about HMRC submissions as part of the pay run and at the end of the tax month. And we talk about pay slips and reporting. So you can sign up for the live sessions. We run them weekly, or you can view that one on demand. Also be aware that we have interactive Sage Payroll training courses available in Sage University. You can get to that at sageu.com to create your profile, and there's a direct link to that course on the current slide. So please feel free to download the slides from the handouts. And if you do need to get in touch with the support team, just access our help center and scroll to the bottom of any help article where you'll find the get in touch link. And then from there, you can choose that you're a customer needing help with Business Cloud Payroll, and then it will give you the various contact options available to you. So thank you once again for joining us at the webinar. I do hope you found it useful. We look forward to seeing you on some of our other webinars soon. Goodbye for now.